Today, we're going to dive into one of the most intense and, honestly, dangerous speeches ever given. We're talking about a history lesson that starts with a divine promise and ends with a man being stoned to death. This is the incredible story of Stephen from Acts chapter 7. So that's the big question, right? How on earth does a history lesson get you killed? Well, Stephen is on trial for his life, and for his big defense, he decides to walk his accusers through their own history. But listen, this is no dry lecture. This is a high-stakes courtroom drama, and every story, every name he mentions, is another piece of evidence building to a verdict that will absolutely seal his fate. All right, so Stephen kicks things off in a place nobody would expect. He doesn't start in the holy city Jerusalem. He doesn't start at the temple. Nope. He takes everyone hundreds of miles away, back in time, to a single guy named Abraham. Right from his very first sentence, Stephen is flipping the script, basically saying, hey, God's story doesn't start where you think, and he definitely doesn't work how you expect.
Now, just try to imagine hearing this. Verse 3. Leave everything, your home, your family, your entire life. And for what? For a place you've never seen. God doesn't even give him a map or a destination. It's just go. Talk about a leap of faith. It's all based on nothing more than a voice.
And this is where the real tension starts, right in verse 5. God makes this massive promise to Abraham that his descendants will own all this land, they'll become a whole nation. But what does Abraham have in that moment? Nothing. Literally not even enough ground to put his foot down on. The promise is huge, but his reality is zero. It's all about having faith in what you can't yet see. Then, in verses 6 and 7, the story gets even wilder. Before this nation even exists, God basically gives Abraham the movie trailer for the next 400 years. First, your descendants will be foreigners. Then, they'll be slaves. After that, I'm going to judge their captors. And finally, they will come out free and worship me right here. The entire epic of the Exodus, all laid out in just a couple of sentences. So now Stephen moves on to the next generation. And this is where he starts to introduce the main theme of his whole speech, this tragic pattern that just keeps repeating itself through their history. The people God chooses have this terrible habit of rejecting the saviors God sends, and it all starts right here with Joseph. Verse 9 is just brutal. The patriarchs, the famous founders of Israel's 12 tribes, they get so consumed by envy for their little brother Joseph that they sell him. They sell their own flesh and blood into slavery for a little bit of cash. But Stephen adds this one crucial line, but God was with him. You see, even in that darkness, the plan wasn't over. And then you get this incredible reversal in verses 11 through 13. A famine hits, and the same brothers who sold Joseph are now starving. They're forced to go to Egypt and beg for food. And who's the powerful governor they have to bow down to? You guessed it, it's Joseph. The very man they tried to destroy is now the only one who can save them. God took their worst act and turned it into their salvation. And get this number from verse 14. 75. When the entire family, the very beginning of this great nation, moves to Egypt, that's all there is. 75 people. It's not an army, it's not a kingdom. It's just one family trying to survive. From this tiny group, a whole nation is about to explode. Okay, Stephen hits the fast-forward button, 400 years into the future. That little family is now a huge nation of slaves. And God raises up another deliverer, Moses. Now, pay close attention, because Stephen is showing his audience that Moses' story is the exact same pattern as Joseph's. First he's rejected, and then he's sent back as their savior. Verses 17 through 19 lay out a terrifying scene. Just as God's old promise is about to come true, things get really, really bad. A new Pharaoh comes to power, and he's terrified by how many Israelites there are. So he launches this horrific campaign of genocide, ordering that every single newborn boy be killed. And into this nightmare, Moses is born. Stephen explains in verses 20 to 29 that Moses basically lives two totally different lives. Life number one, he's a prince of Egypt, powerful, educated, a real mover and shaker. He tries to save his people his own way, by force, but he gets rejected, not by the Egyptians, but by his own people. And that rejection forces him into his second life, a nobody, a fugitive shepherd in the desert for 40 years. This question right here in verse 27, this is what blows up his life. Moses tries to help his people, and this is what they spit back in his face. It's a total rejection. And those words are what send him running for his life for the next 4 decades. So after 40 years of total silence, God breaks into the story. In verses 30 to 33, it's not a whisper. It's a bush that's on fire, but it isn't burning up. And a voice comes out of the fire saying, "I am the God of your fathers." God himself shows up for this rejected fugitive and makes the very ground he's standing on holy. And here in verse 35 is where Stephen brings it all together. He throws their own words of rejection right back at them. Who made you a ruler and a judge? He's saying, see this Moses, the one you pushed away? He is the very one God sent back to be your ruler and redeemer. Stephen is practically screaming at them. Are you seeing the pattern yet? The Savior is always rejected first. Now the focus shifts. Stephen has shown the pattern with the leaders, Joseph and Moses. Now he turns the camera onto the people themselves. And the picture he paints is one of constant rebellion against the guy who literally just parted the Red Sea to save them from slavery. Stephen creates this incredible split-screen image in verses 38 to 41. On one side, you have Moses up on Mount Sinai in the presence of God, receiving the words of life. And what's happening down in the valley at the exact same time? The people are demanding a new God they can actually see and control, so they melt down their gold and build a calf. Now Stephen gets to the very heart of the accusation against him, the temple. He reminds them how Solomon built this amazing house for God. But then he takes a sharp turn. He says they fell in love with the building and totally forgot about the God it was for. They started treating God like something they could trap inside 4 walls. And to prove his point, he drops this bombshell quote from the prophet Isaiah. This is the mic drop moment. He's looking at men whose entire identity is tied to the temple. And he's asking, what kind of house could you possibly build for a God who uses heaven as his chair and the entire planet as a footstool? You can't put the Creator in a box. And right here, the history lesson is over, and the real trial begins. Stephen stops talking about their fathers and the past. He looks these powerful religious leaders dead in the eye, and he uses one word, you. He takes this whole pattern of rejection he's been building and lays it right at their feet. Verse 51 is just an explosion. He calls them stiff-necked, the same insult used for their ancestors in the desert. He's saying, this isn't just a history lesson. This is about you, right now. Your fathers rejected the prophets who talked about the just one, but you guys went a step further. You betrayed him and you murdered him. He holds up a mirror and they absolutely hate what they see. And as their rage just boils over, Stephen isn't even looking at them anywhere. Verse 56 says he looks up and sees straight through the ceiling, past all the chaos and into heaven. And what does he see? He sees Jesus, the man they killed, not dead but alive and standing in the place of ultimate power, right next to God. And that vision sends them right over the edge. The verdict isn't spoken, it's violent. They scream to drown out his voice. They literally cover their ears. They rush him like a mob, drag him out of the city, and they start throwing stones. The man who just argued that history always repeats itself becomes the final, bloody proof of his own point. But as the stones are hitting him, Stephen's last words aren't a curse, they're a prayer. Just like Jesus on the cross, he says, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. It is the most stunning contrast you can imagine. Their absolute brutal hatred is met by his final act of grace. And it just leaves you with this one haunting question. What kind of power allows a man to forgive his own murderers as they're killing him?